Stella had barely turned the deadbolt when another hard knock rattled the cabin door. "Stella," her father shouted from outside, "open this door. We're your parents." She looked through the narrow window beside the entrance. Harold stood on the porch, gripping two worn suitcases. Denise wrapped her cardigan tighter against the cold, tears already streaking down her face. Stella opened the door only a few inches. "What happened?" she asked. "What happened?" Harold snapped. "What happened is we need somewhere to stay. Move." She didn't move. "We're not asking strangers," Denise pleaded. "We're asking our daughter." Stella held the door firmly. "You already gave away the only home I spent 6 years saving." Silence settled over the porch. Harold's jaw tightened. "Don't start that again." "No," Stella answered quietly. "You started it the day you handed my brother the keys." His face darkened. "If you leave us standing out here, you'll regret humiliating your own parents." Stella didn't respond. Instead, she slowly closed the door. Before the latch clicked into place, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She answered instinctively. "Ms. Stella Brooks?" "Yes. This is Officer Daniels. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your brother's lake house." 9 weeks earlier, none of this had seemed possible. Ryan's wedding reception filled the lakeside ballroom with laughter, music, and expensive decorations. Crystal chandeliers reflected across the water outside, while servers moved between tables carrying champagne. Stella stood near the back of the room, smiling whenever someone looked her way. Ryan looked genuinely happy. His new wife, Melissa, couldn't stop smiling. Whatever had happened between Stella and her parents over the years, she had promised herself she wouldn't let it ruin his wedding. Then Harold walked onto the stage and tapped his glass. "We've got one more surprise before dessert." The room immediately quieted. Denise joined him, carrying a framed document tied with a blue ribbon. Ryan laughed. "What are you two doing?" Harold grinned. "Your mother and I wanted to give you something that represents family." He untied the ribbon, lifted the document into the air, and announced proudly, "We've signed the lake house over to you and Melissa." The ballroom exploded into applause. Ryan stared at the deed, speechless. No way. He rushed forward and hugged both parents, while guests stood clapping around them. Stella felt every sound in the room become strangely distant. The lake house. She knew exactly how many times that property had almost disappeared. Every missed mortgage payment, every property tax bill, every emergency roof repair after the storm. Every insurance increase, every desperate phone call that began with, "We're just short this month." For 6 years, she had quietly transferred money whenever her parents couldn't keep up. She had canceled vacations without explaining why. She had postponed buying her own place. She had watched her savings account shrink because every time the lake house was in danger, she convinced herself she was protecting something that belonged to the whole family. No one in that ballroom knew any of it. Ryan certainly didn't. He held the deed above his head while relatives cheered. Harold placed a proud hand on his shoulder. "You've earned this, son." Stella lowered her eyes. She didn't interrupt. She didn't embarrass anyone. She simply picked up her purse and slipped quietly out of the reception before anyone noticed she was gone. 9 weeks later, her parents were standing outside her cabin with nowhere else to go. And now a police officer wanted to know everything she had spent 6 years trying to keep inside the family. The first time Stella sent money for the lake house, she thought it would be a one-time favor. Her father had called on a Tuesday evening. "Sweetheart," Harold had said, his voice unusually subdued, "we're a little behind this month." "A little behind on what?" "The mortgage." Stella had set her laptop aside. "How far behind?" There was a pause. "Far enough that the bank has started calling." She didn't hesitate. "I'll transfer it tonight." Harold let out a long breath. "I knew I could count on you." Within an hour, the payment had been made. Stella didn't ask to be repaid. Harold thanked her several times before hanging up. At the time, she believed she had simply helped her parents through a difficult season. She had no idea she had just started a pattern that would last 6 years. The emergencies never stopped. One spring morning, Denise called. The dock collapsed during the storm. 2 months later, Harold called again. The insurance premium doubled. Before autumn arrived, another problem appeared. The roof is leaking. Then came unpaid property taxes. Then a failing septic system. Then another missed mortgage payment. Every conversation ended the same way. "We'll figure something out." And every time, Stella quietly became that something. She would open her banking app, move money from her savings, and send another transfer. Sometimes she wondered whether they had asked Ryan first. She never had to ask. They always answered before she could. "Ryan's just getting established. Ryan has enough on his plate. We don't want to burden him. Family helps family." That sentence became so familiar it hardly sounded like words anymore. One Saturday afternoon, Stella drove to the lake house after paying for another emergency repair. Harold was replacing a loose porch railing. "You didn't have to come all the way out here," he said. "I wanted to see how everything turned out." Denise stepped onto the porch carrying lemonade. "You saved us again." Stella smiled. "I'm just glad the house is okay." Harold leaned against the railing and looked across the water. "You know what this place means to us." "I do." He nodded slowly. "And one day it'll mean just as much to you." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "When your mother and I are gone, this house should stay with the person who kept it alive." He pointed toward the lake. "You'll never regret helping us." Denise smiled warmly. "There's no reason to make everything so formal with paperwork. We're family." Stella laughed softly. "I wasn't asking for paperwork." "We know," Denise replied. "That's exactly why we trust you." Those words settled every doubt Stella had been carrying. She never questioned another payment after that. Ryan came to the lake house only on holiday weekends. He arrived with coolers, friends, and expensive sunglasses. He spent afternoons fishing from the dock Stella had paid to rebuild. He grilled on the patio Stella had helped repair after winter damage. He talked about taking his future kids there someday. Once, Stella watched him admire the new roof. "Looks great," Ryan said. Harold smiled. "Doesn't it?" Neither man mentioned how it had been paid for. Ryan had no reason to ask. He believed his parents had handled everything themselves. Stella considered saying something. Instead, she stayed quiet. She told herself there would be another time. Late one evening, Stella sat with her mortgage pre-approval paperwork spread across her dining table. She had finally found a small townhouse she could afford. Her phone rang. "Dad." She closed the folder before answering. "Hi, Dad." His voice sounded strained. The bank called again. Stella closed her eyes. "How much?" He gave her the number. It was almost exactly what she had saved for her down payment deposit. Without speaking, she opened her banking app. "You don't have to decide tonight," Harold said. But they both knew she already had. Minutes later, the transfer confirmation appeared on her screen. Her townhouse plans disappeared with it. Harold exhaled in relief. "I'll never forget this." "You don't have to." "Oh, I won't." A few weeks later, Stella's phone rang while she was leaving work. Her mother's voice was unusually excited. "Sweetheart, we've got wonderful news." Stella smiled despite herself. "What happened?" Denise laughed. "You are going to be so happy for your brother." By the time Stella arrived at the wedding reception, she already knew her parents had planned something special for Ryan. She assumed it would be a generous honeymoon, maybe help with a down payment on a home. She never imagined it would be the lake house. The ballroom overlooked the very property she had spent 6 years helping to save. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the water shimmered under the late afternoon sun. Guests wandered between the terrace and the dance floor, complimenting Harold and Denise on choosing such a beautiful venue. "If only every family had a place like this," one guest remarked. Harold smiled proudly. "We've worked hard to keep it in the family." Stella heard the comment from across the room. Her fingers tightened around her glass. She said nothing. After dinner, Harold stepped onto the small stage beside the band. He tapped the microphone. "If everyone could give us just one more minute." Conversations faded. Ryan looked at his parents with a grin. "Should I be worried?" Laughter rippled through the room. Denise carried a large framed envelope wrapped in a navy ribbon. Harold looked directly at Ryan and Melissa. Today isn't just about celebrating your marriage, it's about building your future. He untied the ribbon and pulled out the framed deed. We're giving you the lake house. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then applause erupted. Ryan stared at the document in disbelief. You're serious? Harold handed him the deed. It's yours. Ryan hugged both parents as guests rose to their feet. Someone shouted, "Best wedding gift ever." Champagne glasses lifted into the air. Photographers rushed forward to capture the moment. Stella remained exactly where she was. No one noticed that she hadn't clapped. One aunt walked over with a smile. "Stella, isn't this wonderful?" Before Stella could answer, Denise laughed loudly enough for several nearby tables to hear. Oh, Stella never cared much about the lake anyway. A few relatives chuckled. She was always the practical one, another cousin added. Ryan's the one who really appreciates it. More laughter followed. The words landed harder than the applause had. Not only had her parents erased 6 years of sacrifice, they had rewritten the story in front of everyone. The house she had quietly protected had suddenly become proof of Ryan's importance instead. She forced a polite smile. I'm going to get some air. No one tried to stop her. Outside, the evening breeze carried the sounds of celebration across the water. Stella stood near the parking area, staring toward the dock she had paid to rebuild after a storm. Miss Brooks? She turned. An older man she recognized only vaguely from family gatherings approached slowly. It was Mr. Whitaker, a retired banker who had known Harold for decades. I hope you don't mind me asking something. What is it? He lowered his voice. I used to see you and your father at First County Bank. Stella didn't respond. You were there more times than he was. She looked at the lake. Mr. Whitaker studied her expression before asking quietly, Does Ryan even know who actually kept that place? Stella swallowed. No. And your parents? They know. Mr. Whitaker nodded sadly. I thought so. He didn't ask another question. He simply walked back toward the reception. That night, Stella drove home without saying goodbye. She parked in her driveway and sat inside her car for nearly 20 minutes. Then she made her first decision. She opened her banking app. Every automatic transfer connected to her parents' accounts was canceled. Every scheduled payment was deleted. She closed the shared spreadsheet where she had tracked repair costs, mortgage payments, taxes, and insurance premiums. Then she opened a new folder on her computer. She named it Lake House Records. Into that folder she began saving every bank statement, every receipt, every text message, every email, and every transfer confirmation from the previous 6 years. She wasn't planning revenge. She simply refused to let history disappear. 9 weeks later, a loud knock echoed across her cabin. She opened the door. Her parents stood outside with 2 suitcases. Harold looked exhausted. Denise's eyes were red from crying. We need to come in, Harold said. Stella stepped outside and pulled the cabin door shut behind her. The porch light cast long shadows across the gravel driveway. Harold set the suitcases down with a heavy thud, while Denise hugged herself against the cool night air. We're only asking for a few days, Denise said quietly, until we figure things out. Stella looked from one parent to the other. What happened to the lake house? Harold's expression hardened. That's none of your concern. It became my concern the day you gave away 6 years of my life. We didn't come here to argue, he snapped. We came because we're family. Stella met his eyes. I was family when I paid your mortgage. Neither of them answered. Instead, Harold stepped closer. So you're really going to leave your own parents standing outside? Yes. The single word landed with more force than if she had shouted it. Harold's face flushed. You've changed. No, Stella replied. I stopped pretending nothing happened. Denise reached for her daughter's hand, but Stella gently stepped back. We don't have anywhere else to go. What about Ryan? The question hung in the air. Harold looked away. He can't help. Why? Neither parent answered. For the first time in years, Stella saw something she had never expected from them. Not pride, not certainty, fear. Before anyone spoke again, Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered. This is Stella. Ms. Brooks? This is Officer Daniels with the County Financial Crimes Unit. Harold immediately looked toward her. We're reviewing matters involving the refinancing of your brother's lake house. Stella stayed silent. The lender's records indicate you may have information about the property's financial history. I might. We'd appreciate meeting with you tomorrow morning. What exactly do you need? Any documentation showing mortgage payments, tax payments, insurance payments, repair expenses, or communications regarding ownership. Stella glanced at her parents. Harold had gone completely pale. The call ended. Harold spoke first. You don't need to get involved. I've already been involved for 6 years. This is different. It became different when the police called. Denise wiped tears from her face. Ryan made some mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Harold rubbed his forehead before finally admitting the part he could no longer hide. After the wedding, Ryan refinanced the lake house. Stella stared at him. So soon? He said interest rates were good, but he wasn't making the payments? Harold didn't answer. Denise did. He thought he could catch up later. Stella slowly pieced everything together. The automatic transfers had stopped the day after the wedding. Without them, Ryan had inherited not a paid-for gift, but a property whose expenses had always been far greater than anyone admitted. Within weeks, the mortgage fell behind. Taxes followed. The lender began asking questions. Then investigators started comparing old payment histories with the refinancing documents. The timeline no longer made sense. Harold lowered his voice. They're asking where all those years of payments came from. Stella folded her arms. And? They don't know. I do. He looked at her desperately. If they start digging, they'll find the truth. Denise began crying openly. We never thought it would come to this. You never thought I'd stop paying. Neither parent denied it. That silence answered more than words could. Years of expectation suddenly became visible. They hadn't believed Stella would ever choose herself. The next morning, Stella arrived at the investigator's office, carrying a neatly organized file box. Officer Daniels greeted her with a handshake. You kept excellent records. I work in compliance. She placed the box on the table. Inside were bank statements, wire confirmations, property tax receipts, insurance invoices, invoices for roof repairs, dock reconstruction, plumbing emergencies, and mortgage reinstatements. There were printed emails, text messages, even handwritten notes from meetings with Harold. Officer Daniels looked through the first folder. This covers 6 years. Every payment I made. As the investigators began reviewing the documents, Stella's phone vibrated once more. A text from her father. Please, don't let them see everything. Stella looked at the message for a long moment. Then she locked her phone, slid it into her purse, and pushed the final folder across the table. Everything you need is right there. Officer Daniels spent nearly an hour reviewing the first stack of records before he finally looked up. Ms. Brooks, he said, I need to make sure I understand this correctly. He turned one bank statement toward her. This payment brought the mortgage current. Yes. He picked up another. This one covered the delinquent property taxes. Yes. Another folder. New roof. Yes. Another. Insurance. Yes. And every one of these payments came from your personal accounts? They did. The room fell quiet, except for the sound of pages turning. One investigator began arranging the records into a timeline across the conference table. Month after month, year after year, every financial emergency at the lake house had one thing in common. Stella had paid for it. The investigators then opened a folder labeled Correspondence. Inside were emails and printed text messages stretching back years. One message from Harold read, We couldn't save the place without you. Another said, Don't worry about the paperwork. We both know this house belongs with the person who's keeping it alive. There was another. One day it'll all be yours. Officer Daniels read each message carefully. Then he compared the dates to the payment records. The promises matched the transfers almost perfectly. There was no mystery anymore. The lake house hadn't survived because Harold and Denise had carefully managed it. It had survived because Stella quietly rescued it over and over again. Ryan was interviewed later that week. When investigators showed him the payment history, he frowned. "I've never seen any of this." They handed him copies of the bank transfers. His expression slowly changed. "Those are Stella's accounts." "Yes." He stared at the pages. "My parents told me they'd paid everything off years ago." "They did not." Ryan leaned back in his chair. For several minutes he said nothing. Then he quietly asked, "My sister really paid all of this?" The answer was sitting in front of him. Years of deposits. Years of receipts. Years of sacrifices. He realized the wedding gift everyone had applauded had never truly been funded by his parents. It had been built on his sister's generosity. As investigators continued examining the refinancing paperwork, the inconsistencies became impossible to ignore. The financial history presented during the loan process did not match the actual payment records. Additional questions followed. More documents were requested. The refinancing unraveled. The lender accelerated foreclosure proceedings, and the legal consequences surrounding the inaccurate loan documentation continued through the proper process. By the end of it, the lake house was gone. Not because Stella stopped helping, because the truth finally caught up with years of pretending. A week later, Ryan knocked on Stella's front door. He wasn't wearing the confident smile she remembered from his wedding. "I owe you an apology." She invited him inside. He remained standing. "I honestly didn't know." "I believe you. I thought Mom and Dad had given me something they built." He looked down. "I didn't realize they'd been giving me something you saved." Stella didn't interrupt. "I accepted that deed without asking a single question." He shook his head. "I should have." After a long silence, he said the words she had never expected to hear. "I'm sorry." She nodded. "Thank you." It didn't erase 6 years, but it was honest. For the first time, honesty mattered more than winning. Harold and Denise moved into a modest rental apartment after exhausting what remained of their savings. The celebration they had imagined for Ryan's future became a painful reminder of the choices they had made. Extended family members gradually learned what had really happened. The story spread not through gossip but through documents. Receipts, emails, bank records. People who had once praised Harold and Denise for their generosity began asking a different question. If Stella was paying everything, why wasn't anyone thanking her? There was never a good answer. Months passed. Without the constant emergency transfers, Stella's savings finally began to grow. Instead of rescuing someone else's finances, she invested in her own future. She bought a modest home with a small wooded property and a quiet cabin overlooking a creek. No one had given it to her. No one could take it away. For the first time in years, her paycheck stayed where she intended it to stay. She traveled. She visited friends. She accepted invitations she used to decline, because she was always waiting for the next financial emergency. Most importantly, she stopped answering every phone call with the fear that another crisis was waiting on the other end. Her relationship with her parents never returned to what it had been. They spoke occasionally. The conversations were polite, respectful, careful. The expectation that Stella would sacrifice everything simply because she was dependable was gone. That version of their family no longer existed. One afternoon, Ryan stopped by carrying a small framed photograph. It showed the 4 of them years earlier at the lake house. He looked at the picture before handing it to Stella. "I don't want to remember that place because of what I lost." He smiled sadly. "I want to remember who kept us together for as long as she could." Stella accepted the frame. Then she placed it on a shelf, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof that the truth eventually has a way of finding daylight. That evening, she locked the door to the home she had built for herself, looked out across the trees, and smiled. The greatest home she ever protected was never the lake house. It was the life she finally chose to protect.